Joining me now is Mario Stifano. He is the CEO and Managing Director at Galantas Gold. Good to see you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Now, your projects are interesting because of where they're located. You've got the one in Northern Ireland, one in Scotland. In Northern Ireland with its Omar, is that how you pronounce it? Yep.
Omar.
And so you're looking to expand gold production and the resource footprint, and then you're exploring at Gerlock in Scotland, correct? Can you give us a snapshot of those two?
Yeah, look, we think we've got exciting exploration projects. The one focused in Northern Ireland, 20 kilometers away from us is Dalridian, and for those that don't know who Dalridian or what Dalridian is, it's a 6 million ounce resource, 13 grams. It was acquired in 2018 by Orion for about 535 million Canadian. We're only 20 kilometers away, and the biggest difference I would say between Dalridian and Galantas is Dalridian has a lot of meters drilling to build up that resource, where Galantas has very few meters drilled to build up a resource. And any geologist who's been up to site views our geology quite similar to what Dalridian has. It's just a matter of additional drilling to allow us to build up that resource. And when you look in Scotland, very similar situation to what you would find at, say, LaRonde or some of the big gold-rich VMS systems in either Australia or Canada. These are all old-age rocks, whether you're in Northern Ireland or Scotland. And Canadians and Australians didn't really explore in these regions. And that's what I think is quite exciting. That is the actual opportunity. So if you're looking at Gerlock, for example, Goldfields drilled there in the 70s. It hasn't really been touched since then. And it's a high-grade, gold-rich VMS system that's now been identified over 10 kilometers with very few drilling. But where we drilled, again, we identified some really thick zones of gold and copper. For example, one of our last drill holes was over 30 meters of 4.5 grams gold approximately and just under 1% copper. I mean, those are phenomenal hits.
Right, and we'll circle back to Gerlock in just a sec. So I find something very fascinating, speaking of geology, and let's have a little fun with geography as well. The fault lines at Omar, there's a connection between the likes of Marathon Gold and Newfoundland Gold in Newfoundland. So I know this goes back ages, but could you explain that? Yeah,
very great question. And really, this was all one landmass. If you go back in the ages, Newfoundland, Greenland, Ireland, UK, Scotland. And as the land masses started to separate, you create these big, large faults. And one of them was called the Red Dog Line. And that was actually the theory that Newfound Gold used to drill and explore in Newfoundland for their Queensway project. And they used Dalridian gold as the example of why they thought there's potential there for a high-grade gold deposit. So when you look at Marathon, you look at Newfound Gold, you look at Galantas, you look at Dalridian, and you look at another company in Scotland called Scott Gold. These are all very high-grade gold deposits. The only difference I would say between ourselves and, say, a Newfound Gold is our deposit and our gold is not nuggety. So we see the structure, we actually see the sulfides, and if we see it, we know we got ore. Now, it's a matter, is it 5 grams, 10 grams, or 30 grams, but we don't get those super high-grade nuggety hits, which is great for mining because it's much easier to plan when you know you've got a very consistent structure and ore running through that structure.
Okay, Mario, back more specifically to Omar again. You're focused on a couple of veins, Kearney and Joshua.
Correct.
You've got multiple targets. Exploration plans this year. So what are some of the catalysts we can look forward to?
So on the exploration front, we want to drill Joshua from surface. One of the last holes we drilled from, actually the last hole we drilled from surface was 13 meters of 17 grams. That's high grade, that's in a dilation zone, and that is something that we identified recently over the last year and a half, that these veins pinch and swell. The average vein is about 1.5 meters, but that's before identification of these dilation zones. And now that we know these dilation zones exist, you can see I'm chomping at the bit to try and follow these down dip. So that's really what we want to do at Joshua, is drill Joshua from surface and expand that down dip. The deepest hole at Joshua is only about 200 meters. The deepest hole at Kearney is only about 300 meters. And in between those two veins, which are about 500 meters apart, there's another vein called Kerr. To the east of the Kearney vein, there's another vein called Sammy. To the west of the Joshua vein, there's another vein called Kestrel. And there's a number of these veins all throughout the structure that we've now been able to identify at least 2 kilometers. We think it's going to be over 7 kilometers. So we think we've got one of the best exploration stories out there when it comes to high-grade gold. And additional funding, which we raised $2 million recently with a convertible note, we think we can start to expand that resource.
And then with Gerlock and Scotland, you say the mineralization is high grade, thick, and polymetallic. So can you update us there?
Yeah, so these high grade VMS systems are difficult to find. And VMS systems are like pearls on a string as well. I'm not a geologist, I'm a finance person, but the way it was always explained to me, they're like pearls on a string. You get all these different pods. But when you find a gold-rich VMS system, those are very rare. Laron, for example, which is made Agnico Eagle, is a gold-rich VMS system. The Horn, up in that region, is a gold-rich VMS system. In Manitoba, gold-rich VMS systems. Those are hard to find, and they're usually quite large. Ours is a Beshi style, and we were drilling things in last year. The last hole we drilled was 30 meters of 4.4 grams gold and just under 1% copper. Prior to that, we drilled a hole of about 18 meters of 2.8% copper and just under 1 gram gold. That gives you an idea of the kind of rich, and it's right from surface. And there's really been limited deeper holes here. I think the deepest hole here is about 300 meters. But more importantly, we've identified a number of outcrops and boulders and structures over 10 kilometers. It wasn't just us. The British Geological Survey wanting to encourage exploration in the United Kingdom, because, as I said, this was drilled by Goldfields in the 70s. No one looked. So they went out and did some sampling themselves, and they identified a gold-rich outcrop about 10 kilometers to the south of where we're currently drilling. And we've identified another outcrop 1.5 kilometers to the west of where we're drilling. So we're pretty confident we got hold of a pretty interesting, hopefully large VMS system, in addition to what we have in Northern Ireland.
Lastly, Mario, looking at your shareholder base, some real all-stars, Ross Beatty, Michael Gentili, two gentlemen I've had the pleasure of interviewing. Yep. Eric Sprott's in there. So tie that in with the overall investment case and what investors need to know. Yeah,
so you identified some great shareholders, and they've all been very supportive and continuing shareholders. I think what every shareholder saw and continues to see at Galantas is potential for a multi-million ounce deposit. You've got 6 million ounces, could be 10 million ounces at Dalradian. By the way, they've finally, after a long wait, have started their permitting process. They're in their final stages now. And we think, and what we're hearing is by, sometime early next year, they will finally get their permit. It's been a long process, but we think they're there. Our shareholder base views Galantas as already being permitted as having similar potential geologically to what Dalradian has, but just never had the exploration. So an Eric Sprott, for example, wants high-grade gold. Ross Beatty believed and continues to believe that we have high-grade gold potential here as well. Mike Gentile, the same thing. But what's different for us is we're fully permitted, and we've got a mill, and we get back into production, start producing gold to try and take advantage of a strong gold market. So once this market turns, and we've all been waiting for this market to turn, I think I've been saying this now for 18 months, it is going to turn. Yeah. It's just a matter of when. I think we're hopefully starting to see the beginning of that turn. But when it turns, Galantas is probably best positioned to not only take advantage of a strong gold market in terms of production, but also really take advantage of a really strong exploration story, whether it's in Northern Ireland or Scotland.
Great stuff, Mario. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Mario Stifano. He is the CEO and Executive Director at Galantas Gold.